Welcome to the deep dive. So, have you ever seen this happen? An organization, maybe a community group, it just takes off under this really sharp leader, only to, well, completely fall apart the moment they leave. If that sounds familiar, then you'll know exactly what we're getting into today. We're going beyond the shiny resumes, and really digging into what makes influence last. Our focus in this deep dive, looking at the sources, it comes down to this one idea, really. For leadership to actually stick around, to multiply character, that integrity piece, it has to come before the skills, the competence.
Yeah, and it's often the exact opposite of how things work now.
Yeah.
Especially with hiring moving so fast, it's easy to get pulled in by the technical genius, the great credentials, this promise of quick results. But what the sources keep showing us is this tension. Why do these technically brilliant people so often fail to build, real loyalty or keep things growing authentically? And the answer usually circles back to putting that sort of professional image ahead of, well, the deeper roots of character.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that because the core idea running through these sources is pretty powerful. It's this. Resilient organizations, strong communities, they really thrive when they're led by Indigenous leaders, people from within, leaders whose authority comes from both integrity and knowing the culture inside out. The sources call it the seed in native soil, which is quite evocative.
It really is. And if you ignore that, you risk falling into the trap of the portable expert.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that bringing in an outsider with all the right degrees and resources is the best fix. It often looks like progress on the surface, maybe fixes a specific problem, but it can create this long-term dependency because the real deep change, that has to grow from the inside out.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like putting a bandage on something that needs, deeper healing. So that leads us right into our first segment, really pushing back against this idea that the portable expert is always the answer, especially when we're talking community development or planning for who takes over next in an organization. Why does that local Indigenous leadership tend to win out over time?
Well, fundamentally, it's because leadership authority grows best when it's, organic, planted locally. The leader who comes from the community just gets things, the cultural nuances, the relationships, that an outsider, even the smartest one, can't just pick up overnight. We can break it down into maybe 3 key advantages that the sources highlight.
Okay, let's hear them, because I think this gets missed a lot, especially in bigger, maybe global organizations.
Right. So first off, cultural fluency. The Indigenous leader just naturally knows how to navigate the local traditions, the things you don't talk about, the subtle social cues. They understand the history, the right words to use, when to push, when to be quiet. An outsider, even with the best intentions, can easily cause offense or just misunderstand the situation completely, like stepping on cultural landmines without knowing it.
Right. Imagine trying to roll out some new company policy without understanding the local hierarchy or communication style.
It's exactly. Or, say, implementing a financial system without grasping the local ideas about sharing versus private ownership. You'd fail because the basic assumptions are wrong. You didn't understand the soil.
Okay, so they have that ingrained context, that intuitive understanding.
Precisely. And that feeds directly into the second advantage, relational capital. An Indigenous leader's influence isn't just based on their title. It flows from trust. Trust built up, often over years, through real, authentic interactions. Their authority is deeply relational.
Whereas the outsider's influence might be more transactional.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, transactional. They're respected for the skills or resources they bring to the table. But that respect can evaporate pretty quickly once they leave, or once those resources dry up. Real leadership, the kind that lasts, it's built on relationships, not just transactions. It's personal. It takes time.
So if their authority is lived, it's built on relationships.
Yeah.
That must give them a better feel for complex situations, right? Better judgment.
Yes, absolutely. That's the third point, contextual discernment. It's this ability to read situations accurately, to understand a crisis, spot a subtle opportunity, figure out why people might be resisting something. That kind of wisdom, it's not just about analyzing data points. It's cultivated by living in that environment day in and day out over a long period.
It's like having a feel for the currents in the water because you swim in it every day.
That's a great analogy. And the sources are really clear on this. This kind of moral credibility rooted in consistency, cultural understanding, lived experience. An outsider, no matter how smart or qualified on paper, simply can't replicate that instantly.
Okay, this is really setting the stage for the core theme. Character as the root system. If that native soil is essential, then character is like the crucial nutrient that lets the leadership seed actually take root and grow strong. The sources really hammer this home. Leadership that endures has to start with being right in the heart. Skills, techniques, those can be taught, but if the root system is flawed, you only get shallow growth, temporary success.
Right. And this isn't some new management fad. It's actually a very old blueprint. We see it in ancient texts that were focused on building communities that would last. There are these recurring historical examples where character, integrity, devotion, those were clearly prioritized over technical skill alone.
Yeah, let's dig into those examples because they often flip our modern ideas about what makes a good executive, don't they?
They really do.
Yeah.
Take someone like Moses. The texts are clear. He wasn't chosen for being, a smooth-talking politician.
Oh.
In fact, he argued he wasn't a good speaker at all. He was chosen for his humility, his dependence on guidance from above, his moral core that had been tested out there in the wilderness for decades. The criteria were ethical and relational, first and foremost.
And David is another strong example from the sources. His leadership, the kind that lasted, it seems grounded in his identity, his heart being aligned with God, long before he was known for being a great king or general.
Exactly. His relationship, his inner character was the foundation. The competence came later, built on that foundation. And then you have Nehemiah. Rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, that was a huge logistical and engineering task, right? But his success wasn't primarily down to just project management skills. His ability to plan, organize, deal with opposition, it all flowed directly from his character. Because he was seen as a person of integrity, someone who prayed, he could see through the political games, rally people against internal problems like greed, and lead with real moral authority. His competence was visible, yes, but it grew out of that deep-rooted discernment that came from his character.
That sequencing is so important. Character first, then competence flows from it. So let's drill down on some of those non-negotiable character traits. The source texts, like 1 Timothy and Titus, they lay out these lists for leaders, for elders, and they feel like gatekeepers showing that who the leader is fundamentally matters more than just what they can do. Let's start with above reproach. What does that actually mean?
Above reproach, yeah, that's the starting point, the absolute foundation. It doesn't mean being perfect, sinless. Nobody is. It means living with such consistent integrity, both in public and in private, that no legitimate, fact-based accusation can stick and undermine your credibility. It's about being observable, accountable, transparent in your daily life. Your walk matches your talk.
And today that would extend beyond just personal behavior, wouldn't it? Into things like finances, how you communicate online.
Oh, absolutely. Financial transparency is huge. Integrity in how you represent yourself and others online.
Yeah.
How you handle conflict or stress consistently. And it's especially critical in more collectivist cultures, where the leader's family life and community standing are seen as deeply interconnected. If a leader's personal life seems chaotic or hidden or full of contradictions, their public message, no matter how well crafted, just loses its power. People won't trust it.
Which brings us naturally to that second trait you often see highlighted, managing one's household well. Why is the home considered such a crucial testing ground for public leadership?
Because the home is like a mini organization, a microcosm of broader leadership responsibilities. The sources consistently argue that if someone can't manage the complexities within their own family, things like budgeting, resolving conflicts fairly, planning for the future, raising children who are generally respectful and responsible, then they haven't really demonstrated the practical wisdom needed to steward a larger group, like a congregation or an organization. If you can't handle a disagreement at home constructively, how will you handle a major community dispute or a boardroom conflict?
So the skills are transferable. Budgeting at home relates to organizational finances.
Directly. Conflict resolution at home relates to team management. Long-term planning for your family relates to strategic planning for the organization. It's about demonstrating stewardship and wisdom on a smaller, more intimate scale first.
Okay, so that confirms the sequence we talked about. Character, integrity, humility, relational health, managing your own life. Like, that's the root system. And competence, things like being a good administrator, or like the texts say, being able to teach. Didactikos in the Greek, that's the fruit that grows naturally and reliably from those strong roots.
Exactly. And it's important to understand what didactikos really means there. It's not necessarily about having a PhD or being some charismatic orator on a stage. It's more fundamental. Having the capacity to actually transmit wisdom, to model behavior effectively, to teach in a way that inspires people to apply it in their own lives. And that kind of teaching is only really possible when the teacher's own life backs up the message.
Right. Your life is the lesson.
Precisely. Competence is absolutely essential. You need skills. But those skills are only truly reliable and beneficial when they're anchored in that solid character and integrity.
Okay, so we've established the principle. Now let's shift to the practical side, because this is where it gets tricky for a lot of organizations.
Well,
How do you actually identify these rooted character-first leaders, and how do you avoid the common tracks, like just promoting people you know and like, or mistaking cultural familiarity for actual character, or even nepotism, or getting swayed by someone who's just really confident, maybe even arrogant?
yeah, those are real dangers. You absolutely need a more structured, intentional approach, not just gut feeling. The sources suggest something like a multi-layered assessment process. Sometimes this gets formalized into frameworks, maybe like an Indigenous Leadership Readiness Assessment, or IORA, as some models call it. The key is that it forces you not to skip the foundational work of assessing character.
Okay, an ILRA. Let's break that down. What's the first layer, the hard assessment? What does that involve?
This has to come first, and it's the opposite of a quick checkbox exercise. It requires patient, long-term observation. You're looking for evidence of moral integrity, spiritual maturity, genuine humility. And humility, for example, you don't really gauge that in a formal interview setting. You see it over time. How does this person handle criticism? How do they react when they fail? Do they share credit easily? Do they serve others without needing recognition? It's about watching their patterns, their daily rhythms, how they treat people consistently over months, maybe even years, not just a performance snapshot.
Okay, so it's about observing patterns over time. Once that hard assessment shows consistency and trustworthiness, what's layer two? Cultural alignment or contextual wisdom? How do you assess that?
This is where you check their actual understanding of the local context. Do they know the norms, the history, the power dynamics? How deep and healthy are their relationships within the community? Do people trust them? Do they navigate the social landscape with respect and wisdom? You'd assess this by looking at their track record, their network, and importantly, by getting feedback from other trusted local leaders and community members who've seen them in action. Does this person really understand the specific challenges and opportunities here? Things an outsider might completely miss, like local history conflicts, or land issues, or subtle political currents.
Right, so it's verifying their native soil credentials, essentially.
Exactly. And only after those first two layers, solid character and deep contextual alignment, are demonstrably present, then you move to layer three, skill cultivation, competence building.
So the training comes last.
Ideally, yes. Targeted training, maybe formal education, mentorship, exposure to new challenges, but provided after you're confident in their character and their cultural grounding. This is so critical because it means the skills they acquire will likely empower their existing integrity and understanding. They'll use the new tools to serve the community better. The danger of providing advanced skills or positional power before character is established is that those tools can be misused, sometimes for manipulation or self-interest.
Okay, now here's where I want to push back a little, or at least explore the tension. This focus on patience, on long-term observation. It sounds right, but what about the real world? What about urgent needs? What if your competitors are moving fast? Isn't there immense pressure to just appoint someone quickly, even if they're not perfectly vetted on the character side? Is this patient approach always practical?
Ah, yes. That's the classic speed trap. And the source material is very, very cautious about this. The argument is that the consequence of rushing an appointment, of prioritizing speed over proven character, is incredibly risky. The sources practically describe it as planting a hidden explosive, a landmine, under the organization or community. Why? Because putting someone in leadership before their character is truly tested and mature often exposes their weaknesses under pressure.
And that leads to?
Impulsive decisions, maybe mishandling conflicts because of pride or insecurity, breaking trust, financial missteps. It can quickly erode credibility, not just the leader's credibility, but the entire organization's. The sources strongly suggest that dealing with a temporary leadership gap is often far less damaging in the long run than the instability and fallout caused by appointing someone who lacks that foundational integrity. Urgency is real, but a bad leader makes things worse, not better.
So the most challenging lesson here, especially for modern management culture that prizes speed and decisiveness, is the need for patience.
Patience is the crucible, really. It's the ultimate test of whether you truly believe character comes first. Think about it like farming. Deep roots take time to grow strong enough to support a large tree and withstand storms. You can't rush that process. Similarly, character development and proving take time. True readiness for leadership isn't revealed in one interview or assessment. It's revealed over seasons of life, through how someone handles success, failure, betrayal, opportunity, temptation, consistently over time. The argument is clear. Waiting for that proven, patient leader is ultimately safer and more sustainable than gambling on someone technically brilliant but unproven in character, no matter how urgent things seem.
This whole deep dive really forces a fundamental challenge to how many organizations operate, doesn't it? The default seems to be hire for the skills, cross your fingers, and desperately hope the character part works out.
Exactly. And we need to flip that script. The sources tell us. Real sustainability, lasting impact, it comes from character first, competence second. An enduring legacy is built by planting those leadership seeds in their native soil. People rooted in integrity within their own context. Yes, competence, skills, they're absolutely necessary, non-negotiable even, but they only become reliable, trustworthy assets when they are firmly anchored by that integrity and that deep cultural connection. We should be looking for depth, stability, not just rapid, potentially shallow growth.
So, thinking about our listeners, whether you're leading a big company, a small team, maybe even just thinking about your family or community group, what's the takeaway? It seems we need to ask ourselves, what assumptions am I making about speed, about efficiency, about what talent looks like? Are those assumptions maybe blinding me to the potential of leaders who are quieter, more consistent, but deeply trustworthy? Am I overlooking the steady hand in favor of the flashy performer?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? The sources often highlight that profound change, true transformation, frequently emerges not from the most obvious candidate, but from the seemingly ordinary person who has simply been faithful, demonstrated integrity, shown wisdom in the small hidden places over a long time. So the challenge is, don't just scan the surface for the most polished resume or the most assertive voice. Look deeper. Who, right there among you, is already living out that character-rooted leadership, showing integrity, managing their responsibilities well, demonstrating practical wisdom day to day. Maybe they're waiting, not for promotion necessarily, but for recognition, for patient cultivation, for the chance to grow into the leader they're already becoming. Perhaps the next truly great leader isn't the one demanding the spotlight, but the one quietly, consistently tending their own garden well.